3 days before Thanksgiving, my mother handed me an envelope with $500 in cash and told me to take my twin boys on a weekend trip out of state. I stood in her kitchen doorway in Oak Ridge Heights, still wearing my steel-toe boots, and looked at the envelope like it was something she'd pulled out of a stranger's trash can. My hands still smelled like flux paste and hot metal from a 12-hour shift at the shop. I didn't take the money. I took my kids and walked away. What my mother didn't know was that the luxury venue her son's fiancée had booked, the floral display towers, and the $40,000 custom glass and steel centerpiece for that wedding, were all designed by a master metalsmith who operates under a ghost persona. Me. And when that main structure buckled 10 minutes before the bride walked down the aisle, I was the only person in the state who could fix it. But by then, my price wasn't going to be money anymore. My name is Nora Vance. I'm 34. I build things that hold 2,000-pound glass panels 40 feet in the air without a single visible weld. Under my real name, nobody hires me. Under Vance Steelworks, a name nobody in my family has ever heard, I've built structures for 3 governors' inaugurations and a rooftop installation at a hotel on the coast that made the cover of an architecture magazine my mother has actually read. She just never connected the dots. She never asked. "Nora, it's not that complicated," she'd said that morning, setting the envelope on the counter between us like a peace offering that was really an eviction notice. Victoria's family is old money. Real old money, not the kind you fake with a nice dress. Her father built half the skyline downtown. I need this dinner to go a certain way, and I need it to look a certain way, and I can't have. She stopped herself. She didn't need to finish. I can't have you looking like exactly what you are. Leo, my older twin by 4 minutes, was sitting at her kitchen island doing his math homework, and Sam was drawing a truck with a crane arm on the back of a church bulletin. Neither of them looked up. They were used to this kitchen feeling cold even when the oven was on. "I work with my hands, Mom," I said. "I always have. I know what you do." She said it fast, "The way you swat away a fly. And I'm proud of you for supporting those boys on your own." I am. But Arthur Sterling built an empire. Victoria grew up with a driver. When she sits at this table Sunday, I need her to see a family that matches theirs, not a family that looks like it's one bad month from the food bank. I want to tell you I had a clever line ready. I didn't. I stood there holding my son's jackets, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 19 years old, and she told me a scholarship to art school was a nice hobby, not a career. Small. Erasable. Like she could fold me up and put me in a drawer until the important people left. "Julian knows about this?" I asked. My brother was in the next room. I heard the specific silence of a man pretending to be on a phone call. "Julian," my mother called, "come tell your sister this is for the best." He came in wearing a suit he definitely didn't need for a Tuesday, phone still in his hand, screen dark. Julian is 31, a corporate attorney with a corner office, and the kind of handshake he learned from a seminar. He looked at me, then at the boys, then very deliberately at the floor. "It's just one dinner, Nor," he said. "It's not forever. It's my kids, Julian. Your nephews." "I know. Victoria's dad doesn't do casual. Everything's a performance for him. Mom's not wrong that we need to bring our best. Our best." Like I was a stain on the tablecloth instead of a person. I didn't argue. Arguing with my mother has never once changed an outcome, it's only ever changed how long the conversation lasted. I zipped Sam's jacket, took Leo's hand, and left the $500 on the counter, because if I'd taken it, some part of her would have believed she'd bought something fair. Here is what my mother did not know, and what my brother did not know, and what nobody in that pristine kitchen had ever bothered to find out in 6 years. The woman they were hiding from Victoria Sterling was the same woman Victoria Sterling had hired 11 weeks earlier for the most important commission of the entire wedding. Vance Steelworks had signed a contract on September the 4th for a $40,000 illuminated glass and steel canopy, the structure the bride and groom would stand beneath, when they said their vows at the Glasshouse estate. I'd sketched the first draft in my workshop at the Iron Vault, the old dockside warehouse where I keep my torches and my bending jigs, 3 days before my mother ever said Victoria Sterling's name out loud in that kitchen. I never met the client in person. Their event planner, a sharp, fast-talking woman named Priya, handled every walkthrough. All correspondence went through Vance Steelworks business email. I sent renderings. I sent structural load calculations, stamped by an engineer I trust, because at 2,000 pounds of tempered glass suspended over 200 wedding guests, you don't guess. You calculate. Twice. I had no idea, sitting in my truck outside my mother's house with 2 8-year-olds buckled in the back, that the sketch pinned to my workshop wall, the one Leo had colored the flowers on with a purple marker while I worked late one Saturday, was the exact same structure my mother was polishing her good china for. I found out 4 weeks later, on a phone call from Priya that started with, "Nora, we have a small scheduling conflict, and I think you should know who the client's future sister-in-law is. But before I get to that call, you need to understand what happened at that Sunday dinner. Because my mother didn't just uninvite me once. She built an entire architecture of exclusion, one polite lie at a time, and every single lie was about to become load-bearing. The dinner where I wasn't allowed to sit was the first crack in a structure that would collapse 10 minutes before a wedding. And I would be the only one who knew exactly how to fix it, because I was the one who built it." Priya called me on a Wednesday afternoon, October the 9th, while I had a torch running in one hand and my phone wedged against my shoulder. "Nora, I need you to sit down for this," she said, and I remember laughing, because I was standing in a warehouse with 200 pounds of raw steel bar stacked behind me. There was nowhere to sit. "The client wants to move the final walkthrough up 2 weeks," she said. "And there's something you should know before you're in the same room as her. Her fiancé's last name is Vance." I turned the torch off. The shop went quiet except for the tick of cooling metal. "Julian Vance," she said. "Is that a coincidence or is that your family?" I didn't answer for a long moment. Sam's marker drawing was still pinned above my workbench, the purple flowers he'd colored onto my structural sketch, the same canopy Victoria Sterling had paid $40,000 to stand under while she married my brother. "That's my brother," I said. Priya went quiet the way people go quiet when they realize they've handed you a live wire. "Does he know Vance Steelworks is you?" "Nobody in my family knows Vance Steelworks is me." I want to tell you my first thought was strategy. It wasn't. My first thought was Sunday's dinner, 5 days earlier, the one I wasn't at because my mother had decided my sons, and I didn't fit the table setting. I found out what happened there the way I found out about most things in that family, secondhand, filtered through my brother's guilt. Julian told me later, chewing through the words like they tasted bad, that Victoria had asked at dinner, casually, over the second course, "Doesn't Julian have a sister?" My mother had answered before Julian could open his mouth. "She works out of state most of the year. Very hard to pin down. Out of state. I live 11 minutes from that kitchen. My sons go to the elementary school 4 blocks from her house. She'd built a version of me that didn't exist, packaged it, and served it to a woman worth more than our entire zip code, because the real version had calluses on her palms, and 2 kids with a father who left before Sam could walk. Victoria hadn't pushed the subject at dinner. She'd apparently just nodded, said something polite, and let it go. I didn't know then that letting it go was the single most calculated thing Victoria Sterling had done all year. I finished the walkthrough call with Priya that day like nothing had changed, because nothing about the contract had. The load calculations still had to hold. The client, whoever she was about to marry, still deserved a structure that wouldn't fail. I've never let a personal situation touch my work, not once, not through a divorce, not through 6 years of my mother introducing me at parties as in construction, like I installed drywall for a living. But I started paying attention differently after that call. And 2 weeks later, at a supplier meeting I almost skipped, I learned something that told me this wedding was never as simple as my mother believed. The glass fabricator I subcontract with, a company called Halden Optical, mentioned that Sterling Holdings had run a full background and financial verification on every vendor touching the wedding, standard for events at that level, 6 figures of security spend just on vetting. Which meant somewhere in Arthur Sterling's compliance department, there was a file on Vance Steelworks. My tax filings. My business registration. My name. Which meant somewhere in that file was the fact that Nora Vance, ghost metalsmith, and Nora Vance, the sister my mother had disappeared from a Sunday dinner table, were the same 11 letters. Victoria Sterling had known who built her canopy before she ever sat down at that table and asked, casually, whether Julian had a sister. I didn't understand yet why she hadn't said anything. I only understood that a woman with that much information, and that much silence wasn't confused. She was watching. And in my experience, people who watch quietly are usually deciding who deserves what they're about to build. My mother, meanwhile, kept moving forward like the ground under her was solid. She started sending me articles about co-parenting boundaries and protecting your children from adult stress, as if excluding my sons from Thanksgiving was an act of protection instead of an act of shame. She invited Leo and Sam to a single approved event, a 20-minute photo opportunity at the engagement announcement, dressed them herself in matching sweaters she'd bought without asking me, and coached them beforehand not to mention Mommy's work clothes. Sam asked me that night why Grandma didn't want people to know I fix trucks. I told him I don't fix trucks. I build things that hold up glass so it doesn't fall on people. He thought about that for a second and said, then Grandma should tell people that. It sounds cool. Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds. By early November, the canopy was 90% fabricated. I'd built the tension cables myself, hand-tightened every turnbuckle, tested the locking pins against loads 40% above what the engineer required, because that's what I do when I don't trust a venue's install crew to finish the job the way I'd finish it. I had exactly one reason to worry, and it wasn't the steel. It was the fact that on-site final assembly, the last 20%, the part where the safety pins get seated and torque-checked, was contracted to the venue's in-house crew, not to me. Standard practice. Cheaper for the client. I'd flagged it in writing twice and been told the venue's team was certified. I had no way of knowing, 3 weeks before the wedding, that the man doing that final install had never worked with a structure this size in his life, and that the safety documentation Priya had shown me didn't match the crew actually scheduled for the day. I also had no way of knowing that my mother had one more move left. One more dinner, one more excuse, one more attempt to keep her daughter small enough to fit under the table. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, she called me with the $500 already decided in her head, already printed in an envelope, before she'd said a single word to me. It's just for the weekend, she told me. Take the boys somewhere fun. I'll make it up to you. I looked at my calendar that night after I hung up. The final structural walkthrough at the Glasshouse estate, the one where Vance Steelworks would meet the client face-to-face for the first time, was scheduled for the exact same weekend my mother wanted me gone. I hadn't told her yet who Vance Steelworks was. I was starting to understand I might not have to. Some things don't need to be told. They just need to be allowed to happen in the same room. I didn't go out of state that weekend. I sent my mother a text saying the boys had a school project due Monday, which was true, and I drove to the Glasshouse estate for the final structural walkthrough under the name Vance Steelworks, wearing a clean button-down over my work pants, because even ghost contractors have to look presentable for a client meeting. Victoria Sterling walked the site with Priya and 2 members of her father's events team. She was taller than I expected, dressed simply for a woman worth what she was worth, and she shook my hand with a grip that told me she'd been raised around people who respected competence more than titles. This is the best work I've seen from a fabricator in 3 years, she said, running her hand along one of the tension cables. Priya said you handle everything yourself. No junior crew. I don't like signing off on someone else's welds, I said. She looked at me for a second longer than the comment required. Neither would I. She didn't say my last name that day. I didn't say hers. We stood under $40,000 of glass and steel, and had an entire conversation without acknowledging the one fact that connected us, and I told myself that was fine, that was professional distance, that was how you handle a client. I know now she was giving me the exact same courtesy my own family had never given me. Space to be seen as competent before anyone decided what box to put me in. The wedding was set for the Saturday after Thanksgiving. My mother spent the 2 weeks between the walkthrough and the ceremony calling me twice a day about seating charts I wasn't invited to sit, and a dress code I wasn't invited to follow. Julian texted me exactly once, a photo of the finished venue setup with the caption "Insane right?" Not knowing he was showing me a picture of my own work, sent to the sister he'd let get erased from a dinner table. I almost told him. I had the words typed out 3 separate times. I deleted them every time, because some part of me, the part that had spent 34 years being folded up and put away, wanted to see how far this would go before I had to say anything at all. I found out how far on the day of the wedding itself, at 2:47 in the afternoon, 13 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Priya called me in a voice I'd never heard her use. "Nora, the canopy's failing. The locking pin on the north support sheared during final tension adjustment. The whole left side has dropped almost a foot, and Arthur Sterling is standing here telling everyone the ceremony doesn't move until someone tells him it's safe." I was 11 minutes from the venue. I told her not to let a single guest under that structure, and I was in my truck before she finished the sentence. Here's what I didn't know yet. The venue's in-house install crew, the ones certified on paper, had subbed the final assembly to a 2-man team that had never touched a suspended glass structure this size. They'd torqued the north locking pin against the wrong spec sheet. An older revision Priya's assistant had accidentally pulled from the shared drive. When the wind picked up that afternoon, ordinary November wind, nothing dramatic, the pin walked loose and the whole north side of the canopy sagged toward the aisle where 240 guests were about to sit. I got to the glasshouse estate in my work clothes, tool bag over my shoulder, hair still pulled back from driving with the windows down. The parking valet didn't stop me because I didn't look like anyone worth stopping. My mother did. She was standing near the entrance in a pale blue dress she'd bought specifically for this day, and when she saw me coming across the gravel with a bag of wrenches and a welding mask hanging off my shoulder, her face went through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. Confusion. Recognition. Horror. "Nora, what are you doing here? You cannot be here right now. Not like this." She actually put her hand out, flat against my chest, physically trying to stop me from walking past her. "Security, please, get her to the back, this isn't the time." I have thought about that moment more than any other moment in my life. My own mother, hand against my sternum, calling security on her daughter at her son's wedding, because I was walking toward a crisis in the only clothes that could actually fix it. I didn't stop. I've spent my whole life stopping when she told me to. I stepped around her hand and kept walking toward the collapsing structure, and behind me I heard her voice pitch up into something close to panic, not because her daughter was in danger, but because her daughter was visible. Victoria Sterling was standing at the base of the canopy in her wedding dress, and she saw me coming before anyone introduced me. She turned to the security guard already moving toward me and said one word. "Stop." Then she turned to her father, a tall gray-haired man in a perfectly cut suit who was on the phone with, I'd learn later, 3 different structural engineering firms who all quoted him a 2-hour response time. "Dad," Victoria said. "This is her. This is Vance Steelworks." Arthur Sterling looked at me the way very few people ever have. Not at my clothes. Not at the tool bag. At my hands, at the old burn scar across my left knuckles from a bad splash of molten metal 11 years ago, the kind of scar you only get from actually doing the work yourself. "You built this," he said. "I built this. I can fix this. I need everyone out from under it in the next 90 seconds, and I need someone to kill the ambient lighting so I can see the pin housing." He didn't ask a single follow-up question. He turned to the venue staff and said, in a voice that emptied the space in under a minute, "Do exactly what she says." My mother was still standing by the entrance, one hand pressed to her mouth, watching 240 guests clear a space for the daughter she'd tried to have removed from the property 15 minutes earlier. I climbed the service ladder at the base of the north support with my mask down, and my hands already moving before my brain finished the calculation, because that's the part of this job nobody outside my industry understands. Under pressure, your training does the thinking. I found the sheared pin, found the housing had held its shape, found that the fix was possible but would require a temporary weld reinforcement I'd need to grind smooth in front of 240 wedding guests, in a dress I wasn't wearing, with a torch I'd hoped never to use in public again. Julian found me at the base of the ladder a few minutes later, still in his tuxedo, staring up at me like he was seeing a photograph rearrange itself into a different picture entirely. "Nora," he said. "What is happening? What are you doing right now?" "My job," I said. "The one Mom's been hiding for 6 years." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Behind him, I could see Victoria watching both of us, arms crossed over her wedding dress, and for the first time since I'd walked onto that property, I understood I wasn't the only person in this story who'd been waiting to see whether my family would finally tell the truth in front of the people it was supposed to be hidden from. I had 11 minutes to fix a structure that was about to fail in front of every important person in this city. I had one weld to make, one truth to decide whether I was finally going to say, and a mother standing at the entrance who still, even now, looked more afraid of being seen with me than afraid of the ceremony collapsing. The weld took 6 minutes and 40 seconds. I know because Priya timed it without me asking, standing at the base of the ladder with her phone in her hand like she needed proof this had actually happened. I ground the reinforcement smooth, checked the pin housing against the correct spec sheet I pulled up on my own phone, torqued the replacement bolt to spec, and climbed down with my mask pushed up on my forehead, and stood on my forearms in front of 240 people in their best clothes. Nobody clapped right away. There was a long stretch of silence where the only sound was the wind moving through the glass panels above us, holding steady this time, and then Arthur Sterling walked up to the base of that ladder and shook my hand like I'd just closed a 9-figure deal. "You just saved a $2 million venue and my daughter's wedding day," he said. "I don't say this often." "That was exceptional work." "Thank you," I said. "The structure's safe. You can proceed whenever you're ready." He didn't let go of my hand right away. "What's your name?" "Your real name, not the business." "Nora Vance." I watched it land on him the same way it had landed on my mother 30 minutes earlier, except on his face it didn't look like horror. It looked like a math problem solving itself. "Vance," he repeated. "Julian's sister." "Julian's sister," I confirmed. The ceremony happened 40 minutes late, under a canopy that held perfectly, and I stood at the back near the catering tents in my work clothes because nobody had told me otherwise, and I honestly hadn't decided yet whether I was staying. My mother found me there during the recessional, guests filing past us toward the reception, her face doing the thing it does when she's trying to rewrite a story in real time. "We can talk about this later," she said quietly. "Right now, please, just let people enjoy." "You called security on me, Mom." "I didn't know it was you doing the work. I thought some contractor's employee had wandered onto the property. I was trying to protect the day." "You were trying to protect the version of me you're comfortable with," I said. "The one that stays home during the important parts." She didn't have an answer for that. For 6 years, she'd never needed one, because I'd never made her give one. The reception moved into the main hall under string lights, and the same canopy I'd built and repaired in the same afternoon. I was gathering my tools near the service entrance, genuinely intending to leave before the toasts, when Arthur Sterling found me again with a glass of champagne in each hand. "Stay for this part," he said, and it wasn't really a question. He walked to the front of the room, tapped his glass, and the whole reception quieted the way rooms quiet for men who've built empires from nothing. "I was going to give a standard toast," he said. "Father of the bride, proud day, all the usual. But something happened 40 minutes before this ceremony that I think this room should hear about." He told them. All of it, the sheared pin, the collapsing structure, the 2-hour engineering quotes he'd been getting on the phone while his daughter stood in her dress watching a $2 million venue lean toward disaster. "And the person who fixed it," he said, "climbed a service ladder in work boots while some of you were still finding your seats. Her name is Nora Vance. She's a master fabricator who's built structures for 3 governors and a hotel that made the cover of a magazine most of you have on your coffee tables. And she is also, as it happens, the sister of the groom. The room did the thing rooms do when information lands wrong-footed. A ripple of confused glances toward my mother's table, toward Julian, toward me standing near the back with soot still on my forearms because I hadn't had time to change. I understand, Arthur continued, that Nora and her 2 young sons were asked not to attend family gatherings recently, out of concern that they wouldn't fit the aesthetic of this wedding. I find that fact considerably more embarrassing than anything my daughter's fiancé's family could have worn to a dinner. I watched my mother's face go the color of the tablecloths. Julian stared at his plate like it might offer an exit. Victoria stood up next to her father, still in her dress, and took the microphone from his hand without asking for it. "I've known who Vance Steelworks was for 2 months," she said, and the room went even quieter. "My father's team runs background checks on every vendor at this level. I found out Nora was Julian's sister in September, and I didn't say anything, because I wanted to see what my future husband would do when it mattered. I wanted to see if he'd protect his sister the way I'd need him to protect me." She looked at Julian, and for the first time since I'd met her, her voice lost its composure. "You let your mother erase your sister and her kids from Thanksgiving to impress my family. You knew, and you let it happen, and you never once said no. I can't marry someone who does that to the people who are supposed to be his first loyalty. Not today. Not until you fix this." I want to tell you, the room erupted. It didn't. It went completely silent, the kind of silence that's louder than any noise, while Victoria set the microphone down on the head table and walked, in her wedding dress, straight toward me instead of toward her groom. "Thank you for saving my wedding," she said quietly, just to me. I meant every word about postponing. This isn't happening today. Not like this. Julian found his voice about 90 seconds too late, chasing after her through a room full of people who'd just watched his entire family's foundation crack open in real time. My mother didn't move from her seat. She sat very still, hands folded on the table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I didn't gloat. I want that to be clear, because I've watched enough of these stories online to know how tempting the gloating is. I gathered my kids' school photos out of my bag, the ones I'd been planning to leave at Julian's table as a small, quiet reminder of what he'd been missing, and I put them back in my purse instead. Some points don't need to be made twice in one afternoon. Arthur Sterling caught me on my way to the parking lot. "I built my first plant from a welding cart, and a loan I couldn't afford," he said. "I don't forget where real skill comes from, and I don't like watching families pretend it's something to be embarrassed about. I'm opening a new fabrication division next year. I'd like you to run it. Head designer. I'll have my office send you numbers, but it starts at $500,000 a year, and it comes with full creative control." I didn't answer him right away either. I told him I'd think about it, because that felt like the honest answer, and honest was the only currency I had any interest in trading that day. The wedding was postponed, not cancelled. It happened 4 months later, smaller, at a venue Julian chose himself without consulting his mother, with Leo and Sam as ring-bearers in suits I picked out, standing under a canopy I built for free because some jobs you do for family instead of money. My mother wasn't at that second wedding. She sent a card. I read it once and put it in a drawer, not out of cruelty, but because some apologies need more time to become real than a greeting card allows. I took Arthur's job. Not because I needed the validation of a billionaire telling me I was good enough. I'd known that for years, welding it into steel nobody ever saw my name on. I took it because for the first time in my adult life, someone offered me a seat at a table without asking me to shrink first to fit it. Leo asked me, months later, why Grandma used to hide my job. I told him the truth. Some people are more afraid of being seen next to hard work than they are of losing the people who do it. He thought about that the way he thinks about everything, slow and careful, and then he said, "That's dumb. Your job is the coolest one I know. I've built glass structures that hold 2,000 pounds over open air without a single visible flaw. I've never built anything as solid as that sentence, coming from an 8-year-old who never once had to be told his mother's work was worth being proud of.